Since 1973, Moody's, the global credit rating agency that provides credit worthiness and financial stability evaluations of states and local governments, has awarded its highest rating, the AAA bond rating, to the state of Maryland. That is until May 14, 2025, when Moody's downgraded the state's credit rating to AA. Maricé, Moody cited several factors contributing to Maryland's downgrade: economic and financial underperformance compared to other AAA rated states. The state's economy is highly susceptible to shifts in federal policies and employment, and elevated fixed costs. Maryland faces high fixed costs, including obligations related to pensions, healthcare, and education, which strains its financial flexibility. While Maryland has taken steps to address these things, these measures have been insufficient so far. What's going to happen?
What's going to happen, huh? I mean, first, it's I can't refute the fact that we got this downgrade. But I do want to compare apples to apples and kind of put it into perspective. And reading Moody's assessment, it's clear we have we have very I would say demanding projects that we are still looking to fund. We have purple line, the red line. Obviously, Moody has an issue with our blueprint, and I get that. I think this is a symptom that I've been talking about within my party as a Democrat is we have a hard time saying no. We want to fully fund everything, and I'm the eldest of four daughters. My parents couldn't send all of us to the French like fancy school. They had to send one of us and not the other. So it's just like we can't always um take care of everything. And and unfortunately, when you're a politician and you have all these promises, it's hard when you're trying to meet all of those responsibilities. That said, the downgrade from the AAA to the AA, in the grand scheme of things, you're looking at a point 10 to point 25 percentile in increase in the interest. I mean, we're still going to pay off our debts. We're still, it's still a high rating. But yeah, in comparison to Virginia, we need to do better. And that's what I was trying to get at, where Virginia has attracted, national, like just private investment from the tech industry. You got Amazon, you got counties even, having these data centers like Loudoun County, for example. They get 75% of their city revenue comes from outside sources, not having to tax their residents. So we do have to look beyond tax increases, and that's really, I think it is a time to kind of just self-reflect, and see, how we're doing vis-a-vis our, the counties in Northern Virginia. And I think that if Montgomery County wants to continue to be competitive and bring young professionals, tech, I would say innovative sectors, then we need to be able to compete with Northern Virginia, like Fairfax, Arlington places, for
Well,
example.
that is such a great analogy and a great way to segue to the question for Mark, which was, you know, uh, our neighboring state of Virginia did maintain its AAA bond rating, despite the fact of having some of the same issues given vis-a-vis federal employment. But some of the factors in its favor were economic resilience, as Morrissey said, being able to be less dependent on federal employment, strong financial management. Even though the General Assembly is dominated by a different party than the governor, they still seem to be able to work together to control spending and a capacity to absorb revenue declines. So, Mark, you know, are we going to learn from what Virginia is doing, or are we just going to keep going down the same path that Maryland seems to like to go down each and every year?
Well, let me pick up on Maricé's point about data centers because I think that they're illustrative of the issue. Loudoun County takes in about an extra $1.5 billion from both property tax and personal property tax, real estate property tax and personal property tax. Um, that's almost equivalent, roughly the same as the General Assembly's tax increase. Now, Loudoun County is only one jurisdiction in Virginia that attracts data centers. It's about half the size of Montgomery County in terms of population, and yet it's absolutely driven this boom in revenues. We're not talking about any special taxes, just the regular taxes that would take place. Contrast that with what the General Assembly did. with their 3% tax on IT services, roughly about $500 million, which even Democratic legislators, Delegate Crosby, were talked about driving businesses in that sector out of the state into Virginia. So if we had the potential of attracting data centers and more IT sensitive businesses, we probably did everything we possibly could to make that not happen. And that's really a shame. So we're kind of at a fork in the road. And if we follow down this fork in the road, the challenge is that Maryland becomes that much more dependent on the federal government because it can't attract the private investment that neighboring states get. And that's a real problem.
So Maricé, while, according to the Washington Post, and this is, a natural reaction, the political debate within state Democratic leaders, including Governor Moore, was to attribute the downgrade to federal policy decisions. But that doesn't really tell the whole story, does it?
Well, I mean, I would say it's a combination of things. Like, as I mentioned, there is an economic downturn nationally. On top of that, Maryland is heavily dependent on federal employment. And, just speaking, I mean, you can't speak on these issues as if policy changes or impacts to I guess consumer behavior or population preferences as if, it all happens in a vacuum. You have to look at also population trends. And I'm glad that Mark went into the model of Loudoun County. If you look at the population of Loudoun County, they are diverse, young, very, very tech savvy. And I'm talking about the area of like Herndon and Reston, like that. They're attracting, and there's a reason. There's leadership that has that mindset. And so that said, when I was in the legislature, I kid you not, I was the youngest, but by 20 to 25 years on average. And so the issue with having a single party state, and like I said, I agree with a lot of you with a lot of the policy issues here, because when a party, it's like anything, it's like when a party is sitting pretty and there's no real competition, then the same old folks keep getting reelected and there's no novelty, there's no there's no like innovation. And so we see that in contrast with Northern Virginia. Now, don't there's a lot of public finance issues over there, but it's not just the issue that we're looking at right now. It's population changes, it's different ideas, innovation, etc. And again, I was born in Virginia, but I chose to come to Montgomery County because I'm progressive and Montgomery County, so I also chose to pay more taxes. And I know that Republicans don't understand this, but for me, it's a value. It's like I want to have.
We do understand that because
Yes.
some of us choose to still live in Maryland. Mark, we only have about a minute left in this segment. So what I really want is kind of a forecast. They're talking about a special session of the General Assembly. Generally, bad things happen when there's a special session. What are your thoughts about something happening in the fall?
Well, and one of the challenges that we had in the last session was it was kind of almost a whack-a-mole of different tax proposals getting suggested, getting raised in the press, and then they'd get knocked down, and then we'd move on to something else. So I think there's no question that there have been under serious consideration a variety of tax proposals. We mentioned the IT services. That kind of came out of left field at the last minute. We'll see what happens with that. So there's a lot to be afraid of going into this year. The challenge is the great reluctance to make cuts, to go back to the blueprint and say we can't afford it yet. And that's unfortunate.
I want to give Maricé the last word. Maricé, when you were in the General Assembly, did you go through a special session?
I did not.
You never? So you never had the...
No, we got... I was serving with Governor Hogan. So at the time, we were able to close all our budget issues, but I never served. I heard about the stories, but I never served a special session.
Well, we're going to have to wrap it up there. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens. And the mood of the public is going to be key to this. I mean, sooner or later, the Next Generation Energy Act is going to be signed into law by Governor Moore. And when that opens up the door for additional expenses to consumers in a dramatic way. And I think there's going to be pushback from the citizens.